Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and welcome to March and the first Monday of the month. It is the 2nd of March 2015. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your webpage at www.arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov/Alaska. Go to the same place. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391, and during the day you can find information on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. 4 o'clock, you'll get your afternoon map briefing there from NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks there. Also, you can listen to the NOAA Weather Radio or Marine VHF for your latest information for your community and village. So a lot of different ways to stay up to date with the changing weather. One of the things that will change through the evening hours there across the upper Kuskokwim Valley is around Aniak and Sparivon. There's an opportunity for some freezing rain. Most of it should be pretty light, probably under 1/10 of an inch, but enough so that surfaces could be slick there. So we're telling you that freezing rain is possible, and we're going to call this an advisory. That'll go until about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So throughout the evening, freezing rain could increase and then probably wind down by early tomorrow morning. There is plenty of warm air working northward once again, and with the warm air aloft and the changes coming in with the moist atmosphere across the West Bering Sea and the North Pacific and across the Gulf, a lot of things are going to be shifting around. However, there's also a good load of cold air coming in behind this. So let's take a look at how the satellite plays this out for us. Over the last 12 hours or so, low pressure has been working up the western Pacific up toward the Kamchatka Peninsula. You can see this is a pretty healthy low pressure system south and west of Petropavlovsk. As that southerly flow works into the western Bering, we're going to see these winds come up across the western and central chain as we go into the midweek. In the meantime, you can also see more of a southerly push working up over the YK Delta into Norton Sound, even Kotzebue Sound with another wave of low pressure there. Across the greater part of Alaska, you'll see another wave of low pressure working its way from south to north across the Gulf of Alaska. Most of the clouds have stayed out of southeast today. Fairly dry day there. A fairly dry day across the interior, but to the north and west in the Chukchi Seacoast, another front is dropping southward. This is going to work with the moisture that's been gathering across the central and northern Bering and start to squeeze out the snow for more and more places across the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, and the Chukchi Seacoast. Now, at this point, there aren't any watches or warnings out for snow, but over the course of the next several days, there will be plenty of opportunities for snow to fall and the winds to pick up once again. Some of our favorite places like the eastern Beaufort Seacoast and across the north slope there all the way out toward Barrow and even across the Brooks Range there. So if you have plans that take you flying, plans that take you driving, if you're on the ice road or perhaps just along the coast, it's time to start watching the weather once again, even though one weather system's already just left the region. So as moisture's working northward, we'll start in south central tonight. Pockets of rain and freezing rain may be possible. Looks pretty light at this point, but be advised if you're driving around, if you've got travel plans that take you in or out of Anchorage in the next 12 to 24 hours, there could be some additional slick roads on top of what you may still have in your neighborhoods or the places that you like to frequent. Across southwestern Alaska, periods of rain and freezing rain and even a little bit of snow may mix in. A lot of that's going to be north of Dillingham. As you get into the lower Kuskokwim Valley, we'll start to get into that colder weather that should produce more snow than anything else. And that'll be the case the further north you go along the western coastline. And the snow will spread in from west to east, especially across areas north of the Yukon. Here's a surface weather map. High pressure sitting out across western Canada, but that combined with low pressure across the western Gulf is working as a conveyor belt of moisture to bring all this weather northward. And you can see the clouds situated all the way out into the northern Pacific. A lot of this is pretty wet stuff. This is going to gradually sneak over into southeastern Alaska, but for right now, things are fairly dry right there. South central, we'll start to see the clouds fill in even more tonight. A wave of low pressure just north of the Alaska range may keep the breezes going across some places like Windy Pass. Up across the north, low pressure is working out of the Chukchi Sea and coming toward northwestern Alaska. Already areas of blowing and drifting snow showing up across the Arctic coast. A wave of low pressure stretches south of that all the way across the Pribilofs and into the eastern Aleutians. And along that boundary, we'll see most of the moisture pretty much hover off to the east there. So all this is working gradually eastward, and with the main focus for precipitation starting here to the north and west. Watch what happens quickly. We see that move into Kotzebue Sound with a 1,000 millibar low. Warmer air is working northward now off the continent, and with that the pressure gradient is going to increase. We expect to see more areas of blowing snow across the Arctic coast through tonight and tomorrow. But this is really the meat of the weather situation here. There's plenty of cold air back behind this, and as this gradually works through Alaska over the next several days, you're going to notice this change. Temperatures will start to go back down, and in fact, by the end of the week and early next week, you might remember that it's winter across some parts of southwest and south central and even southeastern Alaska. Out across the west, an occlusion's working across the western Bering. As this works eastward too, it should stir up the winds for the west and central chain. High pressure is still going to hold things back just a little bit initially across the central Aleutians. You'll see more clouds than anything else. And it probably will break up some of the clouds across the central Bering, but probably not in any large fashion. Across south central, pockets of rain and snow will be possible for Tuesday. Southeast, looking at a little bit more dry weather the further south you go, but from Juneau and Sitka northward to Yakutat, expect periods of rain to start up as we head into Tuesday. We'll watch for some light snow across the Copper River Basin and the Susitna Valley and north of the Yukon Valley. Areas of snow will start to pile up there, especially into eastern Norton Sound and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range especially. Watch for blowing snow across the Arctic coast and across the Chukchi Sea coast as northwesterly winds start to drive in with those colder temperatures passing through Nome. By Wednesday, the front is starting to sag southward, but it's being aligned a little bit more west to east, and at this point, it'll start to slow its southward progression here. It's going to have a little more trouble moving as quickly south as it is from west to east. You can see it's blowing eastward quickly across the Arctic of Canada. Blowing snow will still be an issue, and northwesterly winds may still produce some snow from time to time, but it will be the wind and the cold that you'll be dealing with at this point. Out across the northern Bering, a 999 millibar low is working its way back toward the YK Delta. Warmer air out ahead of that means there's a chance for freezing rain once again, and rain may mix with snow across some parts of the upper Kuskokwim and even the lower Yukon Valley. Across the northern Gulf, a 1,007 millibar low there will keep rain kind of sloshing up against the Gulf Coast. It doesn't look like a terribly strong system there, but it may be just enough moisture with the current weather system out west that rain and snow may still be a possibility into Wednesday, and we'll keep our eyes open for that freezing rain potential as well. A little bit further inland into the Copper River Basin, where cold is not as much of a problem to find, you'll see a better chance for snow there, and rain should be back in southeast as we head into the midweek. Winds will pick up across the central and eastern chain there, especially as that front is blowing through. Look for that to improve a little bit as we get into late Wednesday and Thursday, but for right now, that pressure gradient should stay tight enough through a good part of Wednesday that you'll be dealing with some wind issues as we go through the midweek. So that's a quick run through of what we expect to happen as we head toward the midweek. Let's check out what happened today. Mid-40s for many in southeastern Alaska. It looked like Ketchikan and Nanette saw temperatures in the mid to upper 40s. Even Hyder was 43, Juneau in the mid-40s there. As we head into southern Yukon, temperatures considerably colder. They're back in the upper 20s around Prince William Sound. 30s and 40s. Valdez was 36, 10 degrees warmer down the road in Cordova, and 44 in Seward, 42 in Portage, and 48 degrees around Homer, 33 in Kenai. A little bit further northward, Anchorage was struggling to make the freezing point today. By 4 o'clock, only 31 degrees, 20s and 30s for the Susitna Valley. Healy was 42, considerably warmer there, then in Greeley at 26, and Fairbanks was showing 23. Eagle had 26 degrees as well by 4 o'clock this afternoon. 10 in Fort Yukon, big difference there, 10 in Fort Yukon, 0 in Arctic Village, and 7 for Anaktuvuk Pass, with most of the Arctic coast hovering very close to 0. Now, once you get south and west of Wainwright, temperatures jumped up as that weather system was pulling in that warm air. You can see a remarkable difference right here. And that's the weather system working its way ashore. And with that warmer air moving northward, more places like Wainwright will probably enjoy just a quick snap of that warmer weather. Enjoy probably not being the best word. Teens and 20s for the Kotzebue Sound region as we get into this afternoon, and you'll notice 27 at Tin City, about the same there in Nome. Norton Sound saw temperatures in the lower 30s there. Grayling was 19. Sparrowvon saw temperatures in the mid-20s. McGrath 22. Looked like Galena was holding in the teens today. Bethel up to 41 degrees. My goodness, that's warm for you. And 30s and 40s for areas around Dillingham and King Salmon. Kodiak Island in the lower 40s. Most of the Alaska Peninsula was also in the lower 40s. The Pribilof saw temperatures just shy of 40 by late this afternoon. Unalaska and Dutch Harbor 45. Adak 37, Atka 39, and Attu was at 35 degrees. For southwestern Alaska, most areas should stay at or just above freezing for tonight. Bethel pretty close to the freezing point there. Unalakleet look for 24, 23 in Nome. Kotzebue Sound temperatures will likely hold in the lower to mid-teens. 6 below in Nome, 13 below in Fort Yukon. The interior and the middle Tanana Valley in the single digits and upper teens there. You'll have a better chance of seeing some precipitation develop as we head into the next couple days. South Central, upper 20s to mid-30s there as you head down Cook Inlet. Kodiak Island 38, southeast in the upper 20s. A few places like Ketchikan might make it above freezing tonight and hold there with highs in the mid-40s tomorrow. Closer to 40 the further north you go toward the Lynn Canal and Haines and Skagway included. Prince William Sound will stay in the 30s and 40s tomorrow. South Central closer to 40 degrees. It'll be warming up. Upper 20s and lower 30s for the middle Tanana Valley and southward into Healy and Fort Greely. We're going to hold on to the cold around Fort Yukon to Arctic Village. Look for temps there in the single digits and teens. Low to mid-teens for the Arctic coast tomorrow. It will be warmer in Barrow than it will be in Fort Yukon. And for areas around the Seward Peninsula and Nome, upper 20s are expected. Kotzebue, mid-20s as well. Southwest, look for lower to mid-40s around Bristol Bay, 32 in Nunivak Island, just a little bit warmer around Bethel. The Pribilofs will hold close to freezing, lower to mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula, and close to 40 for the central and western chain. On to flying weather now. Expect IFR along that frontal boundary from west to east. You'll notice that's oriented north to south. There's another wave behind that. Look for IFR conditions for the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and through the Bering Strait. Also, this will develop quickly along the Alaska Range and south and west as you head into Bristol Bay and just north to about the Kuskokwim Valley and then south of Bethel. You'll also expect IFR across Prince William Sound and the windward side there of the Kenai Peninsula and along a trough extending out into the northern Gulf. Most of southeast should be okay. MVFR conditions generally north of Juneau, Haines and Skagway and along the outer coastline. And IFR conditions, of course, along the frontal boundary moving eastward through the western Bering Sea. And at Tuvik Pass, we expect IFR conditions to develop fairly quickly throughout the day. Same goes for Adigan Pass with snow developing there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will likely start at IFR, probably seeing some improvements throughout the day. Rainy Pass also starts at IFR conditions there with MVFR developing. Windy Pass may hold at IFR through most of the day. For Isabel Pass, expect marginal conditions, maybe leaning over to IFR as we go throughout your Tuesday. Mentasta Pass right now far enough east that shouldn't see too many restrictions initially. Tanita Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions developing throughout your Tuesday afternoon. And Porter's Pass may start at IFR with some of the ceiling and visibility lifting just a little bit during the midday and late afternoon hours. Chilkoot and White Pass at this point, we expect to see MVFR developing gradually through your Tuesday. Again, right now, just a little bit east of the main weather system. Freezing levels show that warm and wet air lifting northward again across the Gulf. You can see the surface freezing line snaking through southeast and then hovering fairly close to the Gulf Coast, but that's where it lifts northward as you head out into western Alaska. Look at that, all the way up towards St. Lawrence Island. So you know there's a lot of warm air coming northward, and that has had some changes for the ice as well. We'll talk about that in just a little while. In the meantime, this elevated warm air coming over the surface freezing layer makes it possible for freezing rain to be an issue there. So again, in the Kuskokwim Valley, we're watching for some of that. Tomorrow's icing potential shows that for many areas northward to southward across the west coast from anywhere around 4,000 to 8,000 feet and above, we could run into some at least isolated moderate, if not occasional moderate icing potential. And with that freezing rain, of course, there's probably a very small area that could see severe icing potential. So again, aviators, watch the weather carefully in the Kuskokwim. Across the eastern interior, above 4,000 feet, you'll find the opportunity for some light icing. Below 1,000 feet, there's a much greater opportunity there to find that colder air. The air aloft is warming up. South across the Gulf, above 10,000 feet, and also across the west, ahead of the next weather system for the western chain, generally light to isolated moderate there. Here's a jet stream, and our weather changes are brought to us by this big dip across the jet stream and into the central Pacific. You can see that moisture plume on the satellite picture that lines up very nicely with this southerly flow across the jet. Otherwise, it's more of a west to easterly flow across the entirety of Alaska at this point, and with fewer of these big pronounced dips in the jet stream, they look to be moving on their merry way, a little bit more of a progressive or moving pattern. With that, we should expect more of a westerly flow, and that's what we find here at 9,000 feet. A few areas of low pressure working in from west to east, and each one of those causing a little bit of a weather disruption. High pressure across the eastern Gulf, bringing that southerly flow up and kind of pointing that toward southeast with winds around 40 to 55 knots. Out across the west, winds are picking up there at 9,000 feet, 45 to 60 knots, and westerlies across the Arctic coast, 15 to 20 knots. Similar conditions there, winds around 30 knots for the Arctic slope and the Chukchi seacoast. A westerly flow across the interior continues at 20 to 25 knots. Winds across south central from 20 to 30 knots from the south and west. High pressure just south of Haida Gwaii, giving us a southerly flow into Sitka at 25 knots, and westerlies picking up across the western chain from 40 to as high as 60 knots. Turbulence will be picking up out there as well, as you would imagine, with wind speeds probably around 40 to 60 knots. We should expect at least a little widespread moderate there, so probably seeing that around Kiska and Attu tomorrow. For the west coast, watch for the turbulence to pick up over the next couple days, especially the Chukchi seacoast and areas around the Seward Peninsula, and then isolated areas to maybe a few occasional moderate around the Alaska Range, with winds coming in more from the south and some stronger gusts there. And we've noticed some higher terrain gusts today around the 60 and 70 mile-an-hour range. With that, we should expect some of those higher winds to move into the Aleutian and the Alaska Range below 6,000 feet. Tomorrow, those could reach occasional moderate as well. We'll talk about the ice edge and, of course, your marine forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay with us right here on Alaska Weather.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. Thanks to support from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health and Alaska Public Media, we are able to bring you Hangar Flying. This evening, we are pleased to have on our show Aaron Hall-Mead, the chair of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. Every year, Aaron works with the scholarship committee to find the best candidates for our scholarships. Aaron, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mary.
The Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation has several scholarships available. Can you tell us about them?
Absolutely. We have 3 scholarships available. They are all for people who intend to make commercial aviation a career. So we don't help you get your private pilot's license. There are other scholarships out there to help you with that if you need help. But once you've got your private, our goal is to help you jump up to whatever commercial rating you want.
Okay, great. So if a person was interested in obtaining a scholarship and filling out an application, where would they go?
Well, they would go to our website, the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation's website, and you can always just Google Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. It'll show you the website. And then what we ask is, we ask applicants to have a private pilot's license already, and we'll ask you for proof of that. We ask you for proof that you've been a full-time resident in Alaska for 2 out of the last 3 years. We will ask that you are enrolled in some sort of approved program, or you're in an approved training program. This doesn't mean you have to be in a college program. You can be training with somebody who specializes in something like A&P. But we want some sort of proof that you're really on a serious career path and you're moving forward reasonably well.
So if I was at a university, that would count? Or if I'm working regularly, taking lessons maybe 2 or 3 times a week with an instructor?
Absolutely, and we ask that you are at least 30% through the program, so we know you're going to stick with it, or you've got 2 semesters of the program under your belt. This is for people who are serious about a career in aviation.
Okay. And what does the scholarship committee look for when you're looking for successful applicants?
We look for people, first of all, who have read the entire application and they have completely filled it out. You wouldn't want to fly with a pilot that didn't do his weight and balance, hasn't done his walk around. Well, you wouldn't want to give a scholarship to somebody who can't fill out a simple 2-page application. We ask that it be legible. If we can't read it, we can't award. Please don't put it in pencil, it smudges. Also, we have a hard deadline of May 30th. That is an inflexible deadline. If your application is postmarked the 31st, we don't even open it. We mail it back to you. So it takes a while to get the letters of recommendation and the transcripts if you're in a university program. We recommend that you start early and try to mail it in a week or two in advance so you don't inadvertently miss the deadline. We would hate to throw you out of the pool just because you were a day or two late.
Sure. Can we get to the bottom line and let's talk about how much money is available?
Money is available. We give away up to 3 scholarships a year. Each one of them is $1,500. And when I say making commercial aviation a career, you don't have to be a pilot. You can be an air traffic controller. You can go into aviation management. You can be an A&P. We just want something that is commercial aviation related because Alaska relies on our pilots. There are a lot of places in Alaska you can't get to unless you're in a dog sled, a boat, or an airplane. We need pilots.
We do, and we also need people that help support the aviation infrastructure. Like you mentioned, air traffic controllers.
Absolutely.
And mechanics.
Yes, it doesn't do any good to have pilots if you can't staff an airport.
Exactly.
Yep.
So would it be possible for a person who's applied in the past and won a scholarship, would they be eligible to win again?
Absolutely. We have given scholarships in successive years to several people because they've gone on for more and more advanced ratings. Helicopter, CFI, CFII, external load, we will give scholarships for all of those. And by the way, we're not the only people out there that give scholarships. There are a lot of aviation scholarships out there if you go looking for them. The Alaska Air Carriers gives out scholarships. Now their deadline's always January 1st, so we've missed it for this year, but there's next year. The Alaska Airmen give out some very nice scholarships. The Alaska 99s give out scholarships, as does the National 99s. However, the downside is the 99s are women pilots only, so guys, don't bother. But if you go online and search for aviation scholarships, you'll find there's a lot of them out there.
And it wouldn't hurt if you're filling out one scholarship application. You can probably use a lot of that information to fill out some more applications.
There's a lot of crossover.
Well, thank you very much for this information and for your time, Erin. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to contribute to the scholarship fund at the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, you can do this through Pick, Click, and Give when you file for your permanent fund dividend application. Thank you for your support. Until next time, fly safely.
All right, on to a quick check of the sea ice edge. You can see that the edge is well north of the Pribilovs now and approaching the southern coastline of Nunivak Island. There is just a little bit of ice inside of Bristol Bay, but most of what we're dealing with is still around the Kuskokwim Bay, and even that is pretty thin at this point thanks to the warmer air, and more warmer changes are coming up the coast as we head through the rest of the week. There's also several areas across the northwestern coast that have at least some areas of open water in them that are going to fill back in with the colder air on the way. It won't last much longer, but be advised again that there is some pretty thin ice out there across the northwestern coast. Now, on to southeastern Alaska. Winds are pretty light right now. A general southerly flow working up the inner and outer coastline around 10 to 15 knots on the inside and about 15 to 20 knots on the outside. As we get into Wednesday, the winds will pick up just a little bit more, generally outside of Cross Sound, and from Sitka northward, 20 to 25 knots or so should be expected. 6 to 7 foot seas on the outer coast, and still running around 3 to 4 foot seas on the intercoastal waters, 15 to about 20 knots there from the south and southeast. For South Central, look for a little bit of a stronger flow inside of Prince William Sound, around 30 knots there with a 6 foot sea. Otherwise, north and easterly winds coming down Cook Inlet. Easterlies just west of the Barrens at 20 knots with a 6 foot sea, and southerlies on the eastern side and western side of Kodiak Island at 20 knots with 7 foot seas in the western Pacific. As we get into Wednesday, the winds should settle down. In fact, many areas will have more of a variable flow throughout the day, with the winds being relatively light or calm. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, seas diminish to about 2 feet. Northwesterlies coming off of Kodiak Island should run up to about 15 knots with a 7 foot sea in that area. Around the Alaska Peninsula, look for a southwesterly flow inside of Bristol Bay. The open waters, 5 foot seas should be expected. Northwesterlies crossing the southern part of the peninsula at 20 knots with an 8 foot sea in the Pacific and 10 foot seas in the Bering. By Wednesday, look for more of a westerly shift as the trough moves a little bit further north and east. A variable flow from Castle Cape down toward Chignik, otherwise westerlies around 15 to 20 knots with 3-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, otherwise 7-foot seas toward the southern end of the peninsula. For the Aleutians, a northwesterly flow from Nikolsky to Unalaska running around 25 to 30 knots or so, 13-foot seas in the Bering, 12 to 13-foot seas in the Pacific. Southwesterlies for Adak and Atka at 30 knots, and a little bit of a stronger flow out in the west as those winds strengthen. We see those shift a little bit more to the west and run up to about 40 knots by Wednesday. 22 to 27-foot seas across Kiska and Attu. Westerlies show 30 to 35 knots for the central and eastern parts of the Aleutians. 12-foot seas there west of Nikolsky and 12 to 16-foot seas there on the Pacific side, with south and westerly winds continuing at 25 knots for areas around Unalaska and points east. For the west coast, northwesterlies will be in charge as we get into St. Lawrence Island behind this frontal boundary that's sweeping through tonight and tomorrow. We'll look for the winds to come up a little bit more from about 30 knots for St. Matthew with a 7-foot sea, 11-foot seas around the Pribilofs, also at 30 knots, 6-foot seas closer to land around Kuskokwim. And then we see another switch around as low pressure moves back into the western Bering Sea. You'll see lighter winds coming in from the south and west, 15 knots around Kuskokwim Bay, south and easterly winds across St. Lawrence Island, southerlies for St. Matthew, and southwesterlies for the Pribilofs with a 25-knot wind and a 9-foot sea there. Now across the Arctic coast, south and easterly winds will continue for the Beaufort Sea coast, 25 to 30 knots. Those pick up. Look for an onshore flow behind the front, 25, even 30 knots coming into Kotzebue Sound. And as we get into Wednesday, notice the winds are picking up once again for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, 30 to 35 knots. Winds diminish a little bit, but they turn a little bit more to the north as well. So temperatures should be dropping 15 to 20 knots coming into the Chukchi Sea coast and the Kotzebue Sound region. Let's recap tonight's weather. A freezing rain advisory is in effect for areas around the upper Kuskokwim Valley, or the lower Kuskokwim Valley, I should say, around Sparivon and west. Look for areas to see a little bit of rain and snow, very light accumulation, if any, probably less than 1/10 of an inch. The main weather story should be in the northwest and the Norton Sound region, where another front is working in with that. Expect more snow as we go through the rest of the week. Front will cross through the interior of Alaska, bringing snow to Fairbanks by midweek, and periods of light freezing rain are possible in south central, with a chance for rain and snow as we head into the midweek, with rain returning to southeast. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Arctic Wire Rope and Supply, an Alaskan company providing lifting and rigging products since 1983. Manufacturing custom wire rope, chains, and nylon slings here in Anchorage. On the web at arcticwirerope.com.